What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So we got some great news and interesting news. As the longest reigning champion in the sport of boxing, WBC featherweight world champion, superstar boxer, Mr. Gary Russell Jr. will be back in action against, get this, undefeated, former world champion, turned featherweight title contender, undefeated, 34 wins, 22 wins by way of knockout, no losses, stands at 5'10" and a half with a 70-inch arm reach, orthodox fighter who's 30 years of age, Rey Vargas. With that said, we last saw Rey Vargas in the ring in July of 2019 when he beat Kamada via unanimous decision victory. He's very, very big for the lower weight classes, but like Leo Santa Cruz, you know, it's a gift and it's an art to be able to lose the weight and get down to those lower weight classes. At 5'10" with a 71-inch arm reach, he has the same intangibles of Josh Taylor, Jose Ramirez, and Mario Barrios that all fight at 140. He's fighting now at 126 against Mr. Gary Russell Jr. He campaigned at 122. Now he's going to be fighting at 126. He was granted the mandatory challenger to face Gary Russell Jr., and they have now agreed to a fight with the date scheduled to be announced. With that said, Gary Russell Jr., 31 wins, 1 loss at the hands of 3-division world champion, former Olympic gold medalist, 2-time Olympic gold medalist, former unified lightweight world champion superstar boxer Vasil High-Tech Lomachenko. Gary Russell has 18 knockouts on his resume. Gary Russell, 32 years of age, so he's 2 years elder to Rey Vargas. He's 5'4" and a half with a 64-inch arm reach. So that means that Rey Vargas is going to have a 6-inch height advantage and a 7-inch arm reach advantage over Mr. Gary Russell Jr. Last time we saw Gary Russell Jr. in the ring, he faced off against King Tug. That was in February of 2020. So he's been more active than Rey Vargas. Rey Vargas suffered a leg injury, which kept him on the shelf. And he was awarded to be able to fight for his belt back because he lost it due to inactivity, not in the ring. He was awarded by the WBC to have the opportunity to regain his title, but he chose to go in a different direction and move up in weight and challenge Mr. Gary Russell Jr. This is great news because Gary Russell Jr., he deserves big fights. He has been fighting once a year. You know, many people, they clamor to see Gary Russell more active. This is a huge fight. I believe this is the best opponent Gary Russell has faced since he faced Vasil Lomachenko and lost to Vasil Lomachenko. So I believe that this is a huge test for Gary Russell Jr. I believe that, you know, this is a great way for Gary Russell, you know, to let the boxing world know that he's still very, very relevant. He's still very, very skilled, you know, and he's still in it to have the biggest fights possible. He's been calling out 2-division world champion, undefeated superstar boxer Gervonta Tank Davis for quite some time. They're both from that DMV area. Tank Davis from Baltimore, Gary Russell Jr. is from DC, and it would be a huge rivalry fight. But Gervonta Tank Davis and his team, they don't see that as a big fight, so they don't look to fight Gary Russell Jr. They show little to no interest. Now, another big fight, Gary Russell beat Johnny Gonzalez back in 2015 to regain his WBC title, as he had lost it previously 2 years earlier. 1 year earlier to Lomachenko, okay? So with that said, yes, he has fought some big names, you know, Joseph Jojo Diaz, King Tug, you know, Oscar Escadón, you know, those are big fights for Gary Russell Jr. But with that said, this is going to be the biggest test and the biggest fight in his career, not named Vasil High-Tech Lomachenko. So everybody's going to clamor to see how Gary Russell fares with in this fight with Rey Vargas. Gary Russell Jr., like I said, Rey Vargas is 5'10" with a 71-inch arm reach. He's very active and he has power. Gary Russell is 5'4" with a 64-inch arm reach. So he's going to have a huge height and reach advantage over Gary Russell Jr. So Gary Russell Jr. has arguably the fastest hands in the sport of boxing. Very, very technical. He has power in both hands. Very, very skilled. Has a high ring IQ. Utilizes the ring very well, and has great athletic ability. With that said, this is going to be the toughest test in both of their careers, and I can't wait to see how this plays out. They still haven't agreed to a date, but the fight was headed to a purse bid, but both fighters have now avoided a purse bid, and they both agreed to stage the fight. And so the target date is, from my understanding, they're looking at May or June, possibly late April. That would be great if it's in late April. Gary Russell Jr., he stays in the gym, so he doesn't have to get ready. Rey Vargas stays relatively in the gym. Now, obviously, he's been inactive for quite some time, for 2 years, due to that leg injury he suffered. And so, people are going to be very, very intrigued by this. This could be a springboard for Gary Russell Jr., because Gary Russell Jr. beating Rey Vargas, especially if he does so in convincing fashion, then this calls for Gary Russell Jr., who stated that he possibly could move up to 130, 135. He even called out Terrence Crawford at 147. So, this would be huge for Gary Russell Jr. In his future to beat Rey Vargas and have the opportunity to do so in, dramatic fashion. It's a statement fight for Gary Russell Jr. as well as for Rey Vargas. If Rey Vargas is to beat Gary Russell Jr., I'm sure he has the frame to move up to 130, and there's big fights for him at 130, as is for Gary Russell Jr. You have Shakur Stevenson looking to face the winner of Jamel Herring and Carl Frampton fight that has been moved back. I believe it's to April 10th now. In Dubai, I believe it's going to take place. You also have, the vacant IBF title that was vacated by Joseph Jojo Diaz on the scale. He missed weight and he was stripped of the belt on the scale, so there's big fights. You have Gervonta Tank Davis, who's the WBA 130-pound champion, right? A statement win for Gary Russell over Rey Vargas. Maybe that intrigues Floyd Mayweather, Leonard Ellerbe, and Gervonta Tank Davis to make that fight happen at 130, okay? And so also you have Oscar Valdez, who dramatically knocked out and defeated Miguel Berchelt in dramatic fashion in their fight, okay? He holds now the WBC title. So, there's definitely huge fights to take place at 130. Like I said, Rey Vargas being 5'10" with a 70-inch arm reach, he definitely has the frame to move up in weight. So this is the opportunity, like I stated, for Gary Russell Jr. And maybe he could get more active after this. Maybe he's not so inactive. Maybe he just scares away the opposition as well. We don't know. But I would love the matchup style. Gary Russell being a southpaw, being a slick boxer. Is he going to be able to get on the inside of Rey Vargas? Rey Vargas has a good jab. It's very long, very rangy guy. He has power. So Gary Russell Jr., being at such a disadvantage in the size, he's going to have to work very, very hard to get on the inside. I can't wait to see how this unfolds. And the future is very, very bright for both of these guys because, like I said, the sky's the limit. They both have the opportunity to move up to 130. Imagine if they able to move up to 130, the winner of this fight, and capture the IBF vacant belt. It's already a fight schedule, I believe, for the vacant IBF belt. Or they could get a unification bout. Or they could get an opportunity to fight for the WBC against Oscar Valdez because they both hold the winner. Rey Vargas held the WBC at 122. Now he's moving up. So Gary Russell holds it at 126. So the winner obviously could put themselves in a position to fight for the WBC title at 130. So there's plenty of opportunities for both of these guys. I'm favoring Gary Russell Jr. I believe that Gary Russell Jr. will find a way to get on the inside. I believe his accuracy, his hand speed, his ring IQ will be too much for Rey Vargas. I think eventually he'll, start to pull away and win, a split decision victory over Rey Vargas. I think Rey Vargas have the intangibles to make it a close fight. So I believe that it would be a split decision victory over Rey Vargas for Gary Russell Jr. And I believe Gary Russell Jr. at that point in time exits the division and heads up to 130. So let's see how this unfolds and plays out. Drop a comment in the comment section. Make sure y'all hit that like button. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.